This video is about expository essay conventions, so be sure you're taking notes on your notes template either as you watch or after you're done. To begin, book and play titles are always either underlined or italicized. You'll see The Great Gatsby, Lord of the Flies, Native Son, The Crucible. Those are all either underlined or italicized. You almost always italicize when you're typing. Differently, articles, short story, and poem titles are always put in quotation marks. So we read the poem Prospective Immigrants Please Note, some verses upon the burning of our house, Gift of the Magi. An article like Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God or an essay would also be put in quotes. Next, we always talk about literature with the present tense, in present tense verbs. So instead of Simon saw the Lord of the Flies, we need Simon sees the Lord of the Flies. Next, we're going to talk about citing quotations. So in English class, we're always using MLA format. So if your essay is only about one text, you've already named the author in your title, author, and genre, which we'll talk about, then your citation does not need to repeat the author's name. All you're going to need is the page number in parentheses. So you have your quotation, then close your quotes, put your number here, and your period on the outside. So you'll notice in that example that if the author ends the quotation in a period, there's no punctuation before the closing quotation mark. So let's pretend this quotation ends in a period. Well, instead of putting the period here before that closing quotation mark, I move it to the outside of the parentheses, and I don't have anything until the period on the outside of the parentheses. Now, it's different if the author ends your quotation in a question mark or an exclamation point, because in that case, you're going to leave this before the closing quotation mark. So here we see the question mark, but look, we also have a period here. Same thing with the exclamation point, and we also have a period here. Next things to note is that citations always go at the end of your sentence, no matter where the quotation is located. So look, in this case, I have my quotation in the middle of the sentence, but I'm not citing the page number until the very end of the sentence. Last in this video, there are 3 strategies that we'll talk about for integrating quotations. Strategy number 1, you use an introductory phrase and a comma. So the introductory phrase ends with some kind of a speaking verb, I call it, such as says or said or thinks or acts or believes or ponders, recalls, questions. So let's take a look at some examples. The first one says, Thoreau asks, comma, why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? You'll see I have my introductory phrase here. I have the speaker, and then I have some kind of a speaking verb, and then I have my comma, and then my quote. Same thing with the second one. Here I've given a little context when discussing consequences. Then I have my speaker, and then I have the speaking verb, and then I have the comma. The same thing applies with this third one down here. So you'll see it says, according to Thoreau. Now I don't necessarily have a speaking verb, but I'm still introducing the speaker, right? I still know who this is according to or who says this. And so I still finish with a comma and then my quote. Strategy 2 uses a complete sentence and a colon. So take a look at my example. Jonathan Edwards begins his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, by quoting a verse from Deuteronomy, colon, their foot shall slide in due time. Now notice, I could put a period here, and then everything in blue would still be a complete sentence, and it would be perfectly fine by itself. But instead, I want to actually erase that, and I want to make sure that I have a quote to prove that Jonathan Edwards begins the sermon with a quote or a verse from Deuteronomy. So that means that I then add my quote right after that colon. Here's one more example of that. Jonathan Edwards invokes images of spiders to scare the Puritans into begging for God's mercy. I could easily put a period right here and my sentence would be perfectly fine, but instead I want to give you a quote to prove what I said is true in blue, and so then right after the quote I have right after the colon I have the quote. Strategy 3 is probably one of the most sophisticated ways to integrate your quotes. And that's when you make the quotation part of your own sentence grammatically. So there's no punctuation except those quotation marks that are separating your words from the author's words. Look at my example here. Edwards warns the Puritans that there is no want of power in God to cast wicked men into hell at any moment. If I took away these quotation marks and then I read you my sentence, it would be perfectly normal and it would sound smooth and good altogether. But because I want to attribute that quote to Jonathan Edwards himself, I leave those quotation marks so that I show that even though these words fit with my sentence perfectly, they actually come from Jonathan Edwards. Let's look at one more example of strategy 3. This one says, Edwards tells the Puritans they have reason to wonder why they aren't already in hell, but then he reminds them that they are here in the land of the living and in the house of God, and thus have the opportunity to obtain salvation. Now, same thing as the last slide. All of these quotation marks, I could take them away and you would never know that my sentence had any quotes in it. It would all read smoothly together. But because I want to attribute these quotes to Jonathan Edwards himself in his sermon, I'm going to keep all of those quotes there so that I can show my reader, look, this comes directly from Jonathan Edwards, but his words blend in with mine in this type of sentence.